Today, we are going to talk about parenting
Life
with patience,
audio.
Expert advice on managing
Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
Challenging child behavior.
Your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse
Open
learners.
on another thing. Let
Featuring
me
Peggy
redo that.
Coyer from Sped Homeschool.
Today,
Annie
we are going to
Yorty
talk
from
about parenting with patience,
AnnieYorty.com.
expert advice on
Leilani
managing
Melendez from Living with Eve.
child behavior.
Stephanie Buckwalter from ELARP Learning. And Dawn Jackson from Dawn
Jayne
Jackson
Schuler.
Educational
I forgot
Consulting
to ask
and
you,
Tutoring.
is that the correct
Over
name?
75 years of combined homeschooling
Okay.
expertise,
Awesome.
experiences,
Well, Jayne
and
is the
perspectives.
author,
This group is
and
eager
co-author
to
of
share their
8
wealth of
books in the
wisdom
field
to
of child
empower your
welfare,
homeschooling
including
journey.
Children, Healing
So grab
Homes,
your favorite
How
mug,
Traumatized Children
settle
Impact
in,
Adoptive
and get
Foster
ready for
Families, and
insightful
parenting and
discussions,
transactional adoption,
valuable
real
insights,
questions
and
real
practical
answers.
tips as
David
these
Schuler, her
experts and their
husband,
guests
served as a
dive into
pastor
the
and
hottest
counselor for over
topics in
40 years until his
homeschooling.
passing in
Whether you're
January
a
of
seasoned
2024.
homeschooler,
Much of
just
his work
considering
focused
this
on ministering
path,
to
or
adults who have been
anywhere in
impacted by
between,
early
you
childhood
don't
trauma.
want to miss
David
a
and Jayne
minute
serve
of these
full-time
enlightening
with Back2Back
conversations
Ministries and
that will
regularly visiting
empower your
countries around
child
the
to
world to train and
thrive in their
support
homeschool
organizations and
environment.
ministries by creating
Empowering
trauma-informed
Homeschool
programs. Jayne lives in
Conversations is
Dayton,
starting
Ohio,
right
and she
now.
and David
Join us
are
to
parents
give your
of
homeschool
both
the
birth
power
and
boost
adoption,
it needs to
children as
successfully
well as
educate
grandparents
the
of 4.
unique learners
Welcome
in
to
your
the show,
home.
Jayne. I'm so excited to have you here. We got to kick off some discussion before we started, and I'm just excited to have you share with our audience, because I know that this is a place where a lot of them are very confused, and it's so hard. As I told Jayne ahead of the show, I have 10 adopted siblings from the foster care system. So a lot of times when I talk to parents, they're like, you are the only person who truly understands what I go through.
Oh, right.
And there's just a lot of things that people just don't understand, and how trauma truly affects a life. And yet I'm so excited that there are people like you that have invested time and really learned some ways that we can, in a godly manner, just approach this topic and to really help people to heal and connect. So
yes,
thank you.
Thank you. And I've looked forward to this discussion, Peggy. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So Jayne has a new book, too, that we'll be referencing and talking about. But it is, I can pull up my banner here. It's called Caring for Kids from Hard Places. And that's available right now on Amazon, right? And
yes.
I think on your website, too. SchoolerInstitute.org. So we'll have you definitely talk about that. But the first question I always ask my guests is, why are you so passionate about this topic? And a lot of times it has something to do with some background too. So we would love I'd love for my audience to get to know you a little better, and just know, you weren't just a person who did tons of research and then you wrote a book out of your research.
Right.
Oftentimes my guests, they have some life story that's connected with why they do what they do and why they're passionate about it.
Well, I think God gives you a life story and how he directed it. Just real briefly, my husband and I were living in Branson, Missouri. He's a pastor, and there was a foster family in our church that had 5 teenage foster sons. They were in a car accident, and the mothers said they could no longer care for the kids. So Jeff, who was 14 at the time, asked us to become his foster parents. We hadn't even thought about doing. We had an 18-month-old little girl at home, but I used to say that changed the trajectory of our life, but it put us on the trajectory God wanted us to be on. So it became part of our family. Then I began to work professionally, and I saw the huge gap in understanding the behavior of these kids. So that's been a lifelong journey for both of us. I've worked with children, and David has with adults. But so that's how it kind of all began. Yeah.
Wow. And so you took care of all of them, or one of them, or?
we just took in Ray, and then we were moved to a new pastorate in Lebanon, Ohio. We've even literally unpacked Peggy when the local children's services called and said, we heard you're in town and we'll take boys because of the interstate compact arrangement.
Right.
We brought Jeff with us. So anyway, we took in Ray, and he was 14, adopted at 16.
Okay.
And this is so hard to say. He just turned 57.
Wow.
So to have a 57-year-old, I say, how could I be? I'm 49. How could I have such a son? Anyway. and
we just never age, right?
We never age. God just began planting one book idea and one more passion after another. So you know how that goes.
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely do. And yes, there's such a need for people to care for kids who are in the foster care system that a lot of those agencies are very desperate. My parents used to get calls like that too. They were one of the only homes that would take medically fragile children, and that was even in the state. So the demands are high. When you have that
it's
ability.
Interesting. There are over, and I probably need to have my statistics updated, but these are pretty close, 550,000 children in foster care, with only about 130 to 135,000 families caring for those 500. So it's an incredible need.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And so we just commend all of you that are listening that have done that. You've taken kids into your home that are not your birth children by just God's will and just knowing that you can serve a need. So, and Jayne and I also know it's not easy. And so we want to encourage you in this. And so, yes. So if you have questions or comments as you're watching that you would like us to address during this hour, please do put those in the feed, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and we would love to be able to get those in front of us and answered for you. So in your book, Caring for Kids from Hard Places, you write about attachment and orientation among being the biggest needs in a child's life. What can happen to a person when those needs are not met?
Well, it's very interesting. When you think about attachment and orientation, we were meant to connect. God created us to connect. And his design was to be a healthy, secure attachment. But oftentimes, our kids who come through the foster care, and not just foster care, and when there's been parenting issues, don't have good, strong attachment.
We will continue this conversation after a short break.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.
So I attach to a person who then is to give me orientation, how to live my life. And just a really quick example, we've had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling. And when we get off the airplane in a country where I don't know the language, the translator is my immediate attachment.
Right.
And then she or he will tell us how to navigate, how orient us to the country.
Right.
So without a strong attachment and orientation, our kids will go looking outside the adults in their life. And oftentimes that is gangs in some cases. It's most often the wrong crowd because they are looking for some kind of connection, even though it's not a good one.
Right. They just want to belong and have somebody help steer their life. I mean, that makes sense. As you know, like you said, God made us for community. We feel like we're complete when we're navigating with others.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We had a show a couple weeks ago on attachment, but that whole orientation thing, that's something new to our show. But it makes a lot of sense. I love your analogy of, going you feel hopeless when you're in that situation and you can't navigate life on your own. And a lot of times, kids, that's part of life is you're thrown into situations that are new. And of course you're supposed to be learning in them, but I'm assuming there's not much learning going on if you can't get your orientation correct.
Right. No, because you're living in your fear brain and you can't operate. Yeah. You can't think clearly. So it's a real, and my daughter works for hospice because this is a lifelong need of all of us. And a person who moves into a hospice facility or into that stage of life, they need attachment to someone who's going to guide them through it. It's a lifelong need.
Yeah, beginning to end, we do. We need that. So true. Yep. So your book also provides readers with questions to assist in important discussions with young people who've experienced abuse or neglect. Can you share a few of those questions and also why these types of discussions are so important to have?
Yeah, and Peg, you're talking about the questions at the end of each chapter? Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. And actually, when we wrote those questions, I viewed them as support group kind of questions or church ministry questions. But David used to say questions are like doorknobs, and doorknobs open us to the inside of another person if we learn to ask good questions. And so that's why every chapter hopefully will lead folks to examine where they are in relationship to that particular chapter. I just talked to another person this morning, Kim, and she works with children's ministries and very familiar with homeschooling things. And she wrote a chapter in the book I wrote the chapter, interviewed her like you're interviewing me, on how to welcome in the messy in church. And so that particular chapter, the questions are helping us to examine. For example, if we want to work with kids to be trauma-informed, it helps when we all approach the task together. Why do you think this is important and how you do it? So this is for people working with kids. It's also obviously for parents too, but questions just are doorknobs that open to another.
Right. You're right. The times when we're not thinking about what we're doing as a parent, we're just kind of going through the motions or copying what our parents had, kind of set the tone for. And then we get involved in a situation where we have a child going through something we've never experienced and we don't know how to navigate that. And so taking those steps back, asking ourselves the hard questions, why am I doing these things the way I'm doing it? Why am I expecting this out of this child? It does help us to change our own approach and our own responses. And so that's important. Yeah. There's a lot of change. I know I have a son who went through some trauma 3 years ago as an adult, and we've been having to rechange our entire way of parenting because we can't relate to him the same way we can our other two children.
Yep. And absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult, but it does puts you as a parent in check a lot. And I think we just think at some point, so it's going to be easy sailing or it's hard work as a parent because it changes you too. And that's just a good reminder.
And when you think about what you just said, the whole family structure, the whole family system can be changed. And that is something that people aren't unnecessarily aware of. When you bring in a child with a history of trauma or your child experiences trauma, things do change.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And for a lot of our families, I had told Jayne this ahead of time, we find a lot of families come into homeschooling having their child have gone through trauma in school and the special education system. And we try not to make it look like a place that's awful. A lot of special education teachers are wonderful, but unfortunately it is true that some children come out of that system very hurt and unable to learn. And so trauma can come in a variety of different forms, and yet it's all still trauma. And then the PTSD, which we know very intimately well at our home, it is difficult and it is real. I think sometimes we downplay that, but it is truly a mental condition and disorder, mental health issue.
Yeah, the brain changes. The brain actually, the construction, the chemical, everything changes in the brain. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm so thankful you're doing these kind of broadcasts, because people don't understand what that means, how it, Dr. Karen Purvis from Texas Christian University created one of the most powerful programs called Trust-Based Relational Intervention. It's been evidence-based. It's absolutely incredible. And Peggy, it slipped my mind what I was going to tell you about that. I bet you have.
No.
Oh, no. It'll come out.
It'll come back.
Boy, shoot. I forgot where I was going with that one.
That's okay.
Back. It was one of her great quotes. So it'll have to come back. It'll have to come back.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
We will continue this conversation after a short break.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.
But yeah, it's good to remember. And then we have parents who are trying to pull their kids out from that traumatic event, or after they have gone through something that, just changes their thinking. And then to try to recreate an environment, and they've done everything, followed what everybody else told them, and it's not working. And it's because we miss this piece that we have a child that has way deeper issues than just they need to be schooled at home.
Right. And Peggy, I remembered my quotes because it applies exactly what you said. Dr. Purvis, in her work, talks about trauma infecting the body. It does.
Yes.
With a lot of physical illnesses, potentially. The brain, we know it changes. We now know that trauma goes down to the cellular level. And that is incredible. You can see trauma in in cells. It's incredible. And so it also impacts the belief system, changes, and then also the behavior. So she calls it the 5 Bs. But when we understand this is a holistic impact, that we're going to have to start thinking differently with this child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good understanding, or a beginning of an understanding, because I think so many parents want an easy fix. They're like, well, and trauma happens so fast sometimes, and we just expect we're going to just bounce back just as fast. But I'm assuming that is, as I've seen, it is not the case.
No. And could I give a definition of trauma?
Yes,
please. Would that be okay? So oftentimes I'll get talking with the foster and adoptive parents and talking about trauma, and they finally stop and say, could you define that for me? Because this is a perception. Trauma is a perception that what has happened to me is life-threatening. So it may not be, but it's there's that perception there. And if that gets locked in your brain, that impacts everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And it's so overwhelmingly sad that there's so many people that experience that in their lifetime. And it's scary, and it can change you. So you discuss techniques in your book like behavioral matching, self-regulating activities, which are geared towards helping adults connect well with trauma survivors. Can you briefly explain these activities and give examples of how they can help? Sure.
When we think of all the strategies that work with these kids, and I'm jumping back into the book a little bit because they're lists, and of course I would not have lists, but there's 2 primary foundations two foundational principles, let me put it like that I believe if we grab on as a foundational strategy, we're going to do better as homeschool parents, teachers, wherever we are.
Yeah.
And the first is that there's always meaning behind behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Our kids don't get up every morning and say, how can I ruin my parents' day? I could do that. No. There's always meaning behind behavior. Behavior is often a survival strategy for our kids in foster care and adoption. And the other one is, this again comes from Dr. Purvis, but behavior is the language of children who have lost their voice. And so when you think about our kids who have learned in the environments where they've been, don't speak, it'll cost you. They've lost their voice. And David shortened it to behavior is vocabulary. So if I see this behavior, then he's not using his words, but he's going to use his behavior. So that goes back to the strategies. And several of the strategies that you just mentioned are connecting strategies that before we can ever really connect with a child, we have to, before we can ever correct a child, we have to connect. And so when you talk about such things as behavioral matching, whatever the child is doing, the parent follows suit. I don't know if you ever remember playing mirroring games in school. Like you would put your hand in one direction, they're supposed to follow you.
Oh, yes.
All sorts of mirroring games. These are games to help kids retrain their way of thinking. It retrains the neural pathways. It's new pathways.
Right.
Self-regulation is probably one of the greatest challenges for parents or teachers working with kids with a traumatic past, because that, if you don't have a connection to a meaningful adult who comforts you as a baby, regulates you as a baby, and then you maybe step into learning self-regulation, it never happens. So parents might be taking in older kids and thinking, well, because you are 8 or 9, you need to behave like this. The kids' statistics tell us that these kids can be as much as half their chronological age. And so when you are taking in a child into foster care, and you're going to end up homeschooling that child, probably in adoption, wouldn't be necessarily in foster care, but adoption, that's so important to understand where that child is.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I see when I speak at conferences, a lot of parents come into my my classes that are usually around special education types of things, and they don't have a specific diagnosis, but they say, but we have adopted children or foster children. And I was like, yeah, you're dealing with attachment issues and trauma, and you need to be here. right. Because they need to hear the same thing, a parent with a child with autism needs to hear, because a lot of times it's the same thing. They're not functioning at their age level. You have to meet them where they're at. You have to teach towards mastery. And a lot of times it takes a long time in that relationship. And I tell this to parents of kids. I've written many articles about it too, is that if your child doesn't trust you, they're not going to listen to you, and they're not going to learn from you.
Right.
So that's the foundational piece of teaching.
And relationship is far more important than that curriculum.
It is. Yeah.
And because the curriculum, it's not going to do any good if you don't have a healthy relationship with kids, or at least working toward one. And it's hard. Sometimes it's very, very hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any suggestions for parents who have children who are nonverbal? Because I think establishing those relationships are even more difficult because we've lost the ability to converse back and forth.
Right. Peggy, I knew you were going to ask me that question. That's why I had a conversation with my friend Kim Bato, who lives in Cincinnati, because she's a real expert in this whole topic. And one of the things that question related to was this child has experienced trauma at school in some way, and they're not able to communicate it.
Right.
And I think one of the very first things you need to do is understand what that trauma experience was. What happened?
Right.
Because you can't necessarily deal with it in your own mind until you know what it is.
Yeah.
And also, I think learning your own self-regulation when these things happen. Because it's like a mother bear and her cub.
Yeah.
And we can really, really hurt things by our words if we're not very careful with the professionals that are involved. But I think this goes back to the trauma principles I just talked about, in that behavior has meaning.
Yes.
And Kim gave the example. She has a grandson with cerebral palsy and some other developmental delays. He was born at 24 weeks. I won't share his name, but anyway, they know, and this was a new word that and you would probably know this word. I know you know this word, but I'm not stemming.
Oh yeah. It's a way to regulate that is usually,
behavior.
Yeah.
And so, recognizing behavioral cues for our kids. And a lot of our kids have sensory issues, paying attention to the environment. They cannot tell you, but their behavior is telling you at least there's a problem.
Right.
So working with that problem. And one of an acquaintance of Kim had a child with the same kind of thing, and the school was telling him he couldn't do his coping mechanisms. He couldn't do the stemming that he needed to do. And there was one other area she talked about. So just like with anything, you got to get to the source of what's going on, information from other people. But working on the same kind of connection, one of the things Kim mentioned, she said, we have to assume our children are competent. They hear it, they understand. We don't think they hear and understand, although they are not able to verbalize that. So be very careful about talking about this situation when the child is around, for sure, when we think about that. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I've never worked with a nonverbal child in any kind of educational setting. We've had them in our church, but so I hope that was helpful, Peggy, at some level.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm assuming, like mirroring their responses works the same, because they're able to often see you unless they're blind. But even holding their hands, if they can't see you, to just know that you're seeing them, they're being heard, they're, that you have your eyes on them, instead of, I'm just ignoring you and I'm ignoring this behavior. Because I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. It's then we're failing to listen. Right. If we're not into that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that mirroring, Peggy, says to that child, like what you just said, I'm heard, I'm seen, and gives that child a voice in some way. Even though they can't use words, they can use that. So.
Right. Yeah. So we had a question from one of our viewers, and I would love to address that right now. It's a little bit related to everything we've been talking to. But she said, often when my son is having challenging behaviors, it seems like I'm being manipulated. How do I hold a demand when it is reasonable and I've taken into account primary needs being met, without feeling like I'm being manipulated to ease the demand or mean in holding the demand? I can't tell what he's thinking or feeling. He can't usually express or explain the resistance. Autistic PDA, just learned about the PDA, but nothing has been validated as that description. From Jody C.
Well, when you're dealing with a child with autism, it is not the same way in terms that you can communicate with a child that would be understanding. Does that make sense? So you've experienced a lot of that. I would, That's a huge question to try to answer. Manipulation, because I don't know much history. Has he been in foster care? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Our kids learn survival strategies to the developmental level that they're able to do that, in a sense. If you have a child with some delayed development, their survival strategies may not be as good, if you want to say that, as kids without those disabilities. But they all learn survival. Manipulation is the number one. And for a lot of our parents, not particularly in this case necessarily, I don't know enough about it to really respond to it, lying is a huge factor of manipulation.
Yes.
And I used to, with our foster kids, I looked at it as a moral issue. I made big deal out of the moral issue. When I have come to believe that lying is fear-based. It is a form of fear. It's a form of manipulation. And I was training a group of foster parents. There were probably an adoptive parent. There were probably 120 some in the room. And I asked the question, this might have even been in Minnesota, and you just got back from there. But I asked the question, why do we lie, to the group? And one lady in the back of the room stood up and said, I resent that. I have never lied, even in my childhood. I thought, oops.
Oh, she probably just lied.
Probably just lied, yes. But we lie out of fear of consequences. So do our kids. But I would approach it far differently today as a fear-based behavior and back it off the moral, because the kid's in his fear brain anyway. You can't teach a moral lesson when the kids are in their fear brain. Doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
So I would back, for an example, I don't think Ray would mind. Anyway, I know he doesn't mind. It's not a big deal. But he had come home from school and told me there was a problem at school and told me the story. Well, a little bit later, I got a call from his teacher, and what he told me was nowhere close to the truth that happened. So I went out to him. Now I know better. Now, this is not good, Peggy. Don't do this.
This is the bad, this is the not to do example.
Don't learn from me. So I went out, and he was mowing the lawn. I said, could you turn the mower off? And I said, after all that we've done for you, you just lied to me. He didn't care. It didn't matter. So today, now that I've studied this, that was a long time ago, because I told you his age. I don't want to repeat that age. Anyway, today I would have gone out to him and said, I just talked to the teacher, and I would like to redo this conversation in 30 minutes. We're going to restart this conversation. Hopefully, not always, that they all come out of their fear brain if you give them some time to redo the conversation.
Yes, because they're not feeling like they're being attacked and on the spot.
Right. I heard a man at a conference say he was sharing about these kind of things, and he said, I got to the point where I'd always say to my son, you're not in trouble, would be the first thing out of his mouth. And then he would proceed with whatever they needed to proceed with. They had to bring down his fear level. And so part of manipulation, I can't tell you how many languages I've heard the word lying in from other foster and adoptive parents.
Oh, yes. That's been a common thing in my household. My parents all the time.
And they're so frustrating because you can't get a hold of the kids. In a sense that you connect, you feel a sense of connection. It's very hard.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I'm glad you put it in that framework, because I think it makes it a whole lot easier to not get upset with the child or to get to react. I think that's usually our first. And as Jody said, I feel like I'm being manipulated, and you almost feel trapped on the other side because you know that the child is not telling the truth, but then you also know that you've got to stand your ground too as a parent. You
do. And there's ways to do that. depending on the developmental level of kids, there's a number of ways you can do that. Learning to offer choices is huge with these kind of kids who control is a very big thing. So learning what Dr. Purvis called the power of yes. I love this principle because this works really for everybody, but learning to, when a child wants to do something, saying yes. For example, ask me if you can go to the park, Peggy.
Okay. Can I go to the park?
In the past, I would say, no, we can't go to the park right now. So you're going to get upset. So you say, can we go to the park? And I say, yes, after you've cleaned your room. I answer you because there's something that happens in the brain for some of our kids who have been in traumatic long-term situations before foster care. They stop learning how to receive no.
Oh,
there's something in the brain. What they've done is do a lot of research in POWs, and it's related to being trapped. These kids are trapped in circumstances, so they don't hear no, they hear never, because they're in this hopeless, trapped situation. So if we learn to rephrase how we are still in control,
right?
I'm the parent here. We're not giving anything away, with the understanding that our kids can't receive no very well, at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I 3 of my foster adopted siblings were in a meth house for 3 years, and the situation was so bad that they have been the toughest, because really that they never had any options. They felt trapped from the beginning.
Right.
And that just forms who you are as a person, those crucial years of your life.
Oh yeah, your whole belief system is created. The attachment, and your guest a couple of weeks ago probably addressed this, but we form our attachment within the first year of life. And of course, if it's an unhealthy one, it can be worked on. You can work on it. You're not stuck in that attachment style.
Right.
So
yeah. But it's a lot to work in the other direction from.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's it.
Yeah. I would love to know how you would encourage families who are home educating children with past traumas and neglect to utilize the extra time that they have at home with their kids every day as they home educate and mentor and love and live with their kids, because they're not sending them to school. They've got all these extra hours. How can they really take advantage of that time? Well,
obviously, depending on the age of kid, but this would be across the board. They may already, and I'm sure doing this, and I'm not talking about planning a recess where the kids go out and play. I'm talking about playtime that's scheduled every day with the adult.
Yeah.
That the adult is involved. So play is the love language of kids. So that is really, really important. And a lot of things people would already be doing in these extra hours. We had a family, actually they were an adoptive family that I work with, and their biological kids were all homeschooled because the family wanted them to develop an interest in their life and had the time to do it. And one of the young ladies' interest was swimming. So part of the extra hours, they were at the swimming pool. She entered in the Junior Olympics. She didn't go any further than that. But so looking at those interests of our kids and using that extra time to develop that, I think would be really, really important.
Yeah. It goes back to that relationship and that time spent. And I think, homeschool parents alike, they're not spending as much time with their kids, even though they are at home. People just tend to get busy, and we tell parents that a lot. So it's good to hear from you that this is also a good strategy.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Peggy, we didn't get it into the book, but I don't think we did. But there is a whole new phenomenon that's being researched. And it's called distracted parenting.
Oh, yes.
And it's really something researchers are looking at. If you Google that, and they are seeing cognitive and emotional deficits in children, toddlers, whose parents are on the phone all the time.
Yep.
And so this is huge problem. And I think most cultures now is that they're too busy on the phone.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I said to my guest, I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago, that we went by the park and there was a guy pushing his kid in a swing and looking at his phone and not interacting. You know, I remember when we would go to the park, I'd be running underneath it, you know, and the kids would be squealing and, you know, it's the back and forth and the interaction and,
my saddest picture was a woman who was breastfeeding her newborn, and she held the baby in one arm and her phone in the other. She was looking at the phone, not the baby's eyes.
Oh,
so we don't know how important that is. That we had a local pastor here. We went one Sunday just to visit, and his message was on for children. Presence matters. Whoa, it does.
Yeah, it is. You have to turn around, face them in the eyes, and realize that you got enough time to get everything done. And really, what you're looking at on your phone is you'll forget what you were looking at in 5 minutes anyways.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what if a parent has a child that struggles with behavior that they don't think is related to traumatic or neglectful past? Do you have any insights on how what we've been talking about might even be helpful for still creating, you know, a stronger parent-child bond? For, say, you know, parents who have been maybe just a little less connected to their kids.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the principles in the book, and I call them connected parenting principles. A friend of mine just published a book, The Connected Parent, and it's a great book. But the principles are the same, whether they are foster care, adoption, biological. That the key to the children's heart is that we have to connect before we correct. I would say that we were it was a time era that our daughter was growing up, and she's forgiven us, but a real punitive time. And when you're in the church, you tend to really be strict with your kids because, well, we fell under that lie and got out of that lie, so to speak.
Yeah.
But connected principles, looking at ways to connect. And a lot of them are in our book that they work for they are human, every human principles, whether you're adult or a little one or whatever. So those connecting principles and what they can do to change a family. Yeah.
So true. And is it ever too late to start working on this?
No, it's not. If you have adult children that you feel that perhaps you didn't parent well because you believed one way, you didn't connect, it's fine. Start over. Start over. I'm sorry. This is how we should have done it.
Yeah.
And hoping they'll pick up the message with their own kids.
Right. Yes.
That they'll stop the negative cycle that perhaps, and we were passed down from that. My generation was punitive. We didn't, my dad didn't use any connecting principles when he was disciplining. He just went right to discipline, which was the culture.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's nice to see, that we're coming around, but it's a necessity for what's been going on in our society and how disconnected families really are now. So really these principles, whether you pulled a child out of a traumatic situation or they've gone through some sort of trauma, and we're connected or attached early on, but there's just so much stuff. Or, the likelihood of any of us going through trauma, unfortunately, is rather high in our society too.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the reasons, Peggy, David and I wrote this book is because of the great need of church people working with really children or adults to understand that many are coming with a traumatized history, many times unresolved, and you're going to see it in their behavior.
Right. Yes. And we should love before we judge.
Right. Absolutely.
Probably just love and not judge at all. That's
right. That would be good. Yes.
Yes. So are there any other things that you talk about in your book that would be of interest to our viewers?
Well, I think this book, the last 2 chapters, really, I think would be, and almost be better if folks started with the last 2 chapters if they've got a traumatic history. And because this is dealing with adults with a traumatic history and what happens if you don't deal with it and the ramifications of that. Right. So I think when I look at the whole book, thinking about the last 2 chapters, I would encourage anybody that's going to be a foster adoptive parent, well, to read the whole book, of course, but look at those last 2 chapters as you're reading, because you may bring to your foster care adoption experience your own stuff. And
exactly.
when you are triggered, which is very easy, you're going to respond out of your own woundedness, not out of being taught or trained to respond differently.
Yeah. I think, I just remember being a young parent and, trying to find those books that showed me the easy steps, and it wasn't until I started coming upon books that were teaching me how to be more relational. Because I was brought up in that same day and age where it was very, disciplinary, motivated, not relationship motivated. And I knew it didn't work. And so now, having used a lot of those principles with my own kids, it feels like that often is the thing when I'm speaking out to audiences that people are like, oh, it catches them because they want those easy steps, but it's not so easy always to build those relationships, but it's so worth it.
Right. And Dr. Purvis, I love her work, so that's why I quote her all the time, says this, particularly obviously in foster care and adoption, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I think that's true for any kind of parenting. We can't do this in a quick way. No. It is really a lifelong marathon.
It is.
For sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of my adopted siblings that are now adults it's when they're finally kind of, they're finally getting their life together and realizing people they can trust and leaning into those people that help them navigate, like you talked about at the very beginning. And that's when they start seeing things finally come together for them.
Yes.
They realize that the people they pushed away that were the closest were the ones that they could really trust.
Sure.
It just takes, sometimes just being there and being available when they come back and say, oh, I probably shouldn't have pushed you away.
Let me rethink this one.
Yeah, exactly. And being willing to say, yes, I'm available still. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking to us about your book. And so your book is Caring for Kids from Hard Places. And I know that the link from your website goes right to the book on Amazon. So is that where you send people mostly?
Yeah, I just send them, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And then your website, Schuler Institute or SchoolerInstitute.org. I'm saying it wrong.
Right.
I think.
Schooler, right. Yeah.
Yes. Right, so what can people find there? Because I saw that you have some things for individuals as well.
Right. What we are developing, and this is brand new. Actually, Peggy, the original name was something else. And we had to change the name. Community Impact Center is what it was, because there was another one in Dayton. But the board insisted that we change it to school or institute in October. We had no idea David would not be here any longer than January. It was such an honoring thing. We voted against it. David and I did. But they said, no. So what you're going to see, and I'm just kind of waiting for the right timing as I walk through this stage of my life, but we have book clubs. I will be doing a book club probably in September. We have people from all over the United States on our book clubs. They're anywhere from six. Yeah. So we'll be doing Caring for Kids. Other books we've done is A Whole Brain Child, Connect the Parents. So all of those books, we've done book, and it's really a great way to get ministry staff together or parents together that are talking the same language, and you're together over 6 weeks, and they form friendships, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Yes. So definitely check that out. We'll put the link in the show notes. So you can just click on it, whether you're watching live right now, just come back to the YouTube channel or wherever you're watching. And those links will be on YouTube, Facebook, as well as on the podcast when this comes out on that as well. So, thank you so much, Jayne. I appreciate
I really enjoyed
your time and your willingness to share with our audience. Next week will be a pre-recorded session that I did with Dr. Jan Bedell. She is the chairman of the board of SPED Homeschool, but she is also a neurodevelopmentalist. And we spent an hour talking a while ago about dyslexia and how to approach it from a neurodevelopmental approach, which is very different than probably a lot of approaches that you're familiar with. So if you have a child that struggles with reading or dyslexia and has a diagnosis, you'll definitely want to tune in for that next week on our show. But I just want to thank you, Jayne. I'm so sorry for your loss of your husband. You both had an amazing work together, and I'm so glad that you're continuing it on in his absence. You have a lot of things that your life work has made an impact in, and I'm glad that people can continue learning from you. So.
Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us here on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Definitely check out spedhomeschool.com, our website. We have a brand new platform that launched on June 1st where you can actually create an account, and it's like a private Facebook. So you can tell us your stories, share resources, and connect with other parents, even create a local group so you can connect with parents right near you. So definitely dive into that and check out our website at spedhomeschool.com. Otherwise, I will see you again here next week, right on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Bye, everybody.
I want to take just a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on this podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
Hey everybody, I'm Dale.
And I'm Tamara.
And we're hosts of the Kainos Project podcast,
where we help you tackle ancient Christian truths in everyday settings.
The word kainos means new, and that's exactly what we want to do on our podcast. Bring something new from what is old in our faith.
And on this show, you might hear us explore topics like what the Bible has to say about student loan forgiveness, discuss how the Satanic Temple affects our view of religious liberty in America, or even question why is it that so many people are having rapture anxiety.
To learn more about the podcast, go to lifeaudio.com.